Well, good morning to all participants joining from New York, and good afternoon to those joining from Geneva. Welcome to the launch of the event of the report, Realizing Rights, Changing Lives. In a context where human rights mechanisms are challenged by the pandemic and the UN financial crisis, this event aims at highlighting and acknowledging success stories and share the good news that the UN human rights system does provide concrete results for people, and in this case, for children. This event further aims to discuss the engagement strategies that seem to work best in triggering changes in people's lives and to recognize the state's progress towards the full realization of human rights and the Sustainable Development Goals, leaving no one behind. For the first part of this event, we will hear the opening remarks from our high-level speakers. Afterwards, Mr. Mac Lyman, Universal Rights Group Executive Director, will present the main findings from the report, Realizing Rights, Changing Lives. Following the report presentation, we will hear highlights from the case studies, and finally, I will open the floor to all participants for comments and questions. So now it is my pleasure to share the video message of Ms. Henrietta Ford, Executive Director of UNICEF.
Excellencies, colleagues, partners, ladies and gentlemen. At UNICEF, human rights are at the heart of everything we do, specifically children's rights. Their rights to health, education, water and sanitation, opportunities and protection, and their right to a voice, to be heard. But while rights are inherent, they are not self-executing. We need action to bring them to life, and human rights mechanisms to provide a powerful tool that can do this. Driven by our mandate to support the Convention on the Rights of the Child, now 31 years old, UNICEF staff members in more than 100 offices every year actively engage with these mechanisms to translate the promise of human rights into better lives for children. Staff members help reveal the realities that children face. They place these realities at the forefront of the human rights reviews in each country. They help us shape solutions and recommendations to sharpen our programming. And today, we are pleased to join our partner, Universal Rights Group, as well as the EU and Uruguay, to present the findings of a new study that shows the results of this work. Results like a 50% decrease in the number of children in residential care in Montenegro over the last decade, and a 1/3 decrease in the number of girls in Kyrgyzstan who were married, a prohibition of corporal punishment in Scotland, Wales, and Jersey, an 11% decrease in school dropout rates in Uruguay, and a 20% rise in girls attending secondary school. At the same time, our work is far from over. Children's rights are under threat from COVID-19 and the impacts of drastic measures that governments are taking to control the virus. Schools are closed, health and immunization systems are strained, household economies are suffering. All of these impacts amount to a child's rights crisis. So let us use this new report not only as a celebration of our progress on child rights, but as a call to action, to do more, to urge governments to invest in children today and tomorrow, and to bring human rights to life in every country, in every community, and for every child.
I thank Ms. Ford for her message and for the inspiring remarks. And now we will hear the opening remarks of Ms. Michelle Bachelet, the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Dear colleagues, I commend UNICEF and the Universal Rights Group for these important initiatives. It highlights the crucial role of the human rights mechanism, such as the Universal Periodic Review, special procedures, and the treaty bodies, in bringing positive change in the lives of children. Supporting states to close the gap between human rights obligation and their implementation on the ground is my office's top operational priority and an urgent one. Multiple global crises, such as COVID-19, its social and economic fallout, and the climate emergency are challenging people's rights, including children. Decades of progress risk being reversed, exacerbating inequalities. Those who were already the most vulnerable are suffering the worst impacts, especially in the poorest countries. Protecting and advancing human rights, including the rights of all children, is the foundation for recovering better into more just, equal, and resilient societies. The United Nations human rights system, with all its mechanisms, plays a crucial role in indicating the path to a more inclusive and sustainable recovery. The 6 country examples in the report speak for themselves, from Montenegro to Kyrgyzstan, South Africa, the United Kingdom, Mongolia, and Uruguay, and there are many more. The study also shows how the UN system, NGOs, and rights groups are increasingly engaged with international human rights mechanisms, bringing critical issues to the table ahead of state party reviews. At the same time, it also highlights the impact that timely and concerted implementation of the recommendations adopted by mechanism can have on individuals, communities, and the society as a whole. In that regard, I welcome UNICEF's long-standing engagement with the human rights mechanism, showing how human rights work can be effectively mainstreamed across the UN. My office will continue to facilitate efforts in this regard. For example, we have recently updated the Universal Human Rights Index, an online database available in all UN languages, providing easier access to over 170,000 observations and recommendations made by human rights mechanisms to states. It is also encouraging to see an increasing number of states willing to track their progress with the help of the National Recommendations Tracking Database, an online tool developed by my office. The database supports states in developing targeted actions and bridging the mechanism recommendation into actual human rights improvements in the countries. Colleagues, human rights mechanisms are complementary to one another, individually and collectively. They can help answer the Secretary General's call for human rights to be transformative and provide solutions. I thank UNICEF for its excellent cooperation with the human rights mechanisms. Together, we can continue to advance children's rights worldwide.
Thank you very much to Ms. Bachelet, and I think we are having some problems with the sound, but that's part of the technology of today, so we urge your indulgence. Now, our next speaker, and I have the pleasure to give the floor to Her Excellency Ambassador Elizabeth Tichy-Filsberger, the President of the Human Rights Council. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleague. I hope you can hear me because I had some problems hearing the High Commissioner. Let me start by thanking UNICEF and the Universal Rights Group for hosting this event and for organizing me and for inviting me to join you all. But let me in particular thank you for the report which you're presenting today. It helps those of us who work in the fields of human rights to do some stock taking on how useful the things we are doing actually are and where we could do better. The topic the report chose for this year deserves the rating groundbreaking. It deals with the essential question to what extent the efforts of the United Nations human rights system with all its tools and mechanisms actually improves the lived reality of millions of children, and in how far there is a gap between the reality on the ground and the words of the most widely ratified the Human Rights Convention of them all, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which, as you know, celebrated its 30th anniversary last year. I think there is a widespread feeling, both between experts and non-experts, that we do not really know to what extent states actually implement the many recommendations they receive from the UN system. Some of them tell us they're drowning in a sea of recommendations. Others say these recommendations are actually a gold mine. If you agree that you'd like to know more about this, this report makes excellent reading. As you know, the Human Rights Council is a kind of canopy over a huge machinery, which involves plenary meetings and many different tools, special procedures, the UPR, Universal Periodic Review. It also does once a year a full day discussion on a specific aspect of the rights of the child. The report gives us the full picture of all that footwork that is done by these mechanisms and tools within the human rights system of the United Nations. It analyzes the usefulness of the Universal Periodic Review, which, as you know, is an exercise where sovereign states assess each other's track records and address recommendations to each other, literally hundreds, thousands of recommendations, often in the presence of senior members of governments who have themselves submitted reports. And that means that the UPR develops a considerable political weight. Recommendations as far as the rights of the child are concerned are about a fifth of all the recommendations made, and they tend to focus on violence against children, rights of the girls, the rights to education, to nutrition, to vaccination, on early and forced marriage, child labor, child trafficking, harmful traditional practices like female genital mutilation and juvenile justice. This UPR is an enormous machinery which keeps states busy over months. But the proof of the pudding is what states ultimately do with those recommendations. The easy answer is the vast majority of recommendations get accepted. That is to say that states commit themselves to make progress, and they include these things in an implementation plan. But what exactly does it mean? We know that about 50% of the recommendations actually require legislative change. So that needs the cooperation of members of parliament. The UPR is currently in its third cycle. It focuses on the implementation of the two previous cycles. And we're proud to say that so far 100%, no less than 100% of states have participated. It will be important to prepare the fourth cycle as well as possible. It is a huge and extensive machinery. This discussion will start next year. There has been some brainstorming this year already. I think it is important to note that there are ideas in the air, and one of them is that there should be an increased involvement of the UPR in development policies. After all, the big, huge working program of the United Nations is about the Sustainable Development Goals, and 90% of these Sustainable Development Goals have to do with human rights. While the UPR is a process between states, the special mandate holders are independent experts who do research on a particular area and then, in their turn, make recommendations to states. Quite a few of these mandates specifically deal with the rights of the child, but even if they don't, most of the mechanisms mention the rights of the child one way or another. We do know that the reports of these special mandate holders are not always pleasing to states. And their point isn't to be pleasing to states. The point is that they're made in good faith with a view to helping states rather than criticizing them. Because let us be very clear about this. If human rights obligations get implemented on the ground, it is owing to states, to their governments, their parliaments, national human rights mechanisms, NGOs, in some cases, UN country teams. But as the report shows, the multilateral system can do a lot to help states in doing that. The report pinpoints, among other things, some success stories. They are never dramatic upheavals. They're rather the stories of quiet changes, small incremental steps, like information campaigns to change perceptions, training programs for government officials, selective changes to national legislation. The good thing about all of these is they produce a sense of ownership. When this whole machinery was first set up, the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, said the international community needs to move from an era of declaration to an era of implementation. I think wherever people live, whatever their traditions or convictions may be, they would all agree that children are our future. And that when we say we mustn't leave anybody behind, we must think of children in particular. The way we treat our children will shape our world of tomorrow. Therefore, congratulations again to UNICEF and the Universal Rights Group for this report and its case studies. The success stories you tell will give hope to people all around the world. And all in all, the report will encourage us, human rights professionals, to do more in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador T.G. Filsberger, and thank you very much for all the leadership that you have provided to the Human Rights Council this year. Now, let me give the floor to our next speaker, that is Mr. Luis Pedernera Reina, Chair of the Committee on the Rights of the Child. His intervention will be interpreted from Spanish to English. Señor Pedernera Reina, tiene usted la palabra.
Muchas gracias, buenos días, un saludo desde Montevideo. Agradezco al UNICEF y al Universal Rights Group por el trabajo que han hecho y que presentan en esta jornada. Mi presentación obviamente va a estar atravesada por mi perspectiva como integrante de un órgano de control de tratado. Mi primera impresión es que estamos frente a un trabajo muy importante por dos cuestiones. La primera es que estamos en una coyuntura de revisión 2020 y este material aporta información relevante sobre el funcionamiento de los mecanismos de protección de derechos humanos. Y un segundo motivo es porque remarca la necesidad de una mayor interacción entre los sistemas de protección de derechos humanos de Naciones Unidas. Quiero destacar también la información y la metodología que aporta el estudio, altamente relevantes para el futuro de nuestro trabajo. Y en ese sentido, apelo a las dos organizaciones a que este trabajo pudiera ser continuado. Cruzar información en ámbitos como los nuestros no es una práctica incorporada. Y lo que el trabajo presenta da cuenta, mediante la evidencia, de la relevancia de la condición de los niños en los diferentes mecanismos analizados, expone las necesidades y dificultades que existen para incorporar la perspectiva de derechos del niño de manera holística en nuestros mandatos. Por otro lado, en estos tiempos de crisis, destaca y sigue considerando como importante la función que cumplen tareas como los mecanismos de monitoreo de derechos humanos, en mi caso, los órganos de tratado. Quiero hacer un especial destaque al rol que juegan las agencias como el UNICEF en la cooperación técnica con los estados. Este trabajo da cuenta de ello. Pero también UNICEF juega un rol fundamental con nuestro comité. Una de las últimas actividades presenciales que realizamos este año, antes de la declaración de pandemia, fue nuestra reunión bienal con las oficinas regionales del UNICEF a nivel global. Y quiero decir y quiero destacar el compromiso en construir una hoja de ruta común para el trabajo colaborativo que identifica necesidades para un trabajo articulado de respuesta a las necesidades de los derechos del niño en los estados.
Señor Pedernera, perdón, lo interrumpo. Si quiere, traducimos hasta ahí para las personas que no hablan español y ya continuamos.
Ok.
Good day to everyone. I would like to thank UNICEF and the Universal Rights Group for the work they present and the event they have prepared. My remarks will be influenced by my perspective as a member of a treaty body. My first impression is that we are before a very important job for two reasons. The first one is that we are within a framework of the 2020 review, which provides relevant information on the functioning of the human rights protection mechanisms. The second reason is that the report stresses the need for greater interaction between the treaty bodies. I would also like to highlight the information and the applied methodology, which are relevant contributions to the future of our work, and it will be important to give it continuity to these two. Crossing information in areas where we work is not an embedded practice. By providing evidence, it shows, the report, the relevance of the condition of children in the different analyzed mechanisms. It exposes the needs and difficulties that still exist to incorporate the perspective of the rights of the child in a holistic way, in the mandates. On the other hand, in these times of crisis, the work highlights and continues to consider as important the function and task of the human rights monitoring mechanisms. In my case, the role played by the treaty bodies. The role of agencies such as UNICEF in technical cooperation with the states, but also with the committee, is also highlighted by the report. One of the last face-to-face activities that we carried out this year before the pandemic was our biennial meeting with the UNICEF regional offices, and we have a common roadmap for collaborative work that identifies the needs of articulated work. Por favor, continúe. Está silenciado.
Los órganos de tratado necesitamos apoyo para funcionar. El volumen de trabajo aumenta día a día, pero esa demanda no se ve correspondida con los recursos humanos y económicos de los que disponemos. Llamo particularmente la atención sobre esta situación, que es grave y requiere urgente atención para poder cumplir con nuestro mandato y hacerlo de manera seria y responsable.
The treaty bodies need support to function. The volume of work is increasing day by day, but with this demand, it is not matched by the human and financial resources that we currently have. I call attention to this fact because it is a serious obstacle to fulfill our mandate in a serious and responsible way.
La pandemia aceleró problemas históricos de los niños y las niñas a nivel global. Ellos son las víctimas invisibles e invisibilizadas de la pandemia. Los datos de muertes evitables y prevenibles, el número de niños que ha entrado en indigencia desde marzo de este año son escandalosos, así como también el cierre de las escuelas, que ha sido llamado por UNICEF como una catástrofe generacional.
The pandemic accelerated historical problems of children at global level. They are invisible and overshadowed the invisible and overshadowed victims of the pandemic. The data on preventable deaths and children in poverty since March of this year is scandalous. The closure of school has been called by UNICEF a generational catastrophe.
En este contexto, nuestro rol cobra un significado especial. Necesitaremos apoyo para cumplir a cabalidad nuestro mandato, cosa que hasta hoy no ha ocurrido. Venimos trabajando durante la pandemia con un gran esfuerzo personal, poniendo de nuestra parte las condiciones y dinero para cumplir con nuestros mandatos, no generar lagunas de protección en los derechos del niño, pero aún así el retraso es importante. Por ello, este trabajo cobra una relevancia importante. El trabajo que hoy se presenta reafirma la necesidad de un monitoreo que ayude a los estados a mejorar la implementación de los derechos del niño. Y especialmente porque el mensaje que debemos trabajar es que la vida de niños y niñas merecen ser vividas en nuestros países. Gracias.
In this context, our role takes on a special meaning and we will need support to fulfill our mandates, something that has not happened until now. We have been working during the pandemic at personal cost and putting conditions on money out of our pockets to fulfill our mandates and avoid generating protection gaps in children's rights. Even so, the delay in the work is important. Hence, this work, the report, acquires a special relevance today. It becomes more relevant because it reaffirms the need for monitoring that helps the state to improve the implementation of children's rights, especially because the message we must work for is that the lives of children deserve worth living. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much to Mr. Pedernera Reina and also to the interpreter for this statement. We very much recognize the work of the committee at this particular time. Now let me give the floor to our final speaker of this initial segment, His Excellency Ambassador Walter Stevens, Head of the European Union Delegation to the United Nations. Please, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I hope you can see me, because it seems that my computer, my video doesn't seem to start. I'm trying this.
We hear you, but we don't see you. But go ahead, Ambassador.
Well, I'll go ahead because we don't want to lose time. So, Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends, let me start by saying that the rights of the child is a long-standing human rights priority for the European Union and our member states, and that we are very pleased to be with you at the launch of this report today. The Convention has made a remarkable difference in the last 30 years. It has provided governments and other duty bearers with a clear to-do list, recognizing also the importance of the agency, and of course also of the voice of the children themselves. Many challenges remain to fully realize these rights of the children around the world, and that is the case including in Europe. I mean, the near global consensus that we have on the rights of the child requiring special attention and safeguarding is, however, something that is very important and that we all can build on. I think that the findings of the report that we are launching here today are very inspiring. There is a real evidence to suggest that the work of the human rights mechanisms, and they have been mentioned already a couple of times now by other speakers, that these mechanisms have a clear and measurable impact on the enjoyment of the human rights across the globe. And our joint and sustained efforts are making a concrete difference in the children's lives. We as EU are very much committed to implementing and promoting the Convention. One example is certainly the biannual resolution that we introduced together with GRULAC EU and GRULAC on the rights of the child, both in the Human Rights Council and in the General Assembly. For our latest resolution in September, we choose a topic that is very critical for both the current and the future generations, namely realizing the rights of the child through a healthy environment. The resolution that was adopted with a strong cross-regional support underscores that indeed it is the best interest of the child that should be the primary consideration in all environmental decision making. So let me just also say that the EU believes in the human rights system, engaging with the treaty bodies, with the special procedures, with the UPR, and has been mentioned again. It is an opportunity to look at your own performance and see where you stand and what you can do better. We are not perfect, and when it comes to human rights, certainly also not, and we are ready to discuss our challenges publicly. One example of this is the EU new strategy on the rights of the child, which is open for all your comments. It has been open already, and it is still open till basically the end of today. So please participate. You still have a little bit of time in our online consultations and make your voices heard. What is the EU doing to further the enjoyment of the rights of the child, apart of introducing resolutions? We also work very closely with our partner countries. Between 2015 and 2019, we supported at least 3,350 projects in 149 countries. And we are very much committed to a human rights-based approach to development. All these actions have been designed, implemented, monitored, based on human rights of the child rights standards and principles, and also with UNICEF and civil society being key partners in these endeavors. Recommendations coming out of the human rights system are not only a key source of information for our development programming, but are also provide a basis for our political and human rights dialogues that we have with governments across the globe. And we are very much committed as EU to supporting our partners implementing their rights obligations, and we are ready to share our own experience and lessons learned. Finally, let me also end by stressing that the UN's human rights framework and its human rights machinery are an important achievement by the international community. Unfortunately, as you said in the beginning, the universality of the human rights and the legitimate role of human rights mechanisms to monitor and promote human rights are constantly put into question by some. I can say that in today's shifting geopolitical landscape, the EU is very much determined to stand strong and be the counterforce to this pushback. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and back to you. And sorry that I couldn't put on my video.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Stevens, and thank you very much to the EU for their strong engagement in this agenda. Now we go to the presentation of the main findings of the report, and it is a pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Mark Lyman, Universal Rights Group Executive Director, to present it. Please, you have the floor, Mark.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Ambassador, and many thanks to our partner, UNICEF, especially Anne Grandjean for partnering with us for this important event, as well as Uruguay and the EU delegation. I will not go into too much detail today, as thanks to the wonders of modern technology, you have a copy of the report before you all, and plenty of time over the Christmas holidays to read it. I would, though, like to make a few short remarks about the report and the research behind it, and then to pinpoint a few important conclusions. On the first point, and while you may understandably accuse me of a little bias, I really do believe this is a groundbreaking study. I say that for three reasons. First, it's the first time, as far as I'm aware anyway, that an attempt has been made to track at a high level of detail important clusters of UN human rights recommendations back down to national level, and thereby to understand the degree to which recipient states are actually implementing the recommendations that we all know that you get a lot of here in Geneva through changes to domestic law, policy, and practice. The second reason why it's groundbreaking is that it's a first attempt to then also measure the impact of such implementation measures on the enjoyment of human rights in the countries concerned through the use of empirical indicator data. And thirdly, it's a first attempt to complete the cycle by assessing the degree to which states and alternative periodic reports back to the mechanisms succeed in informing the UN of progress made and influence subsequent recommendations. So lots and lots of firsts. It's true that the study only covers a limited number of case studies, to specific 6: Kyrgyzstan, Montenegro, Mongolia, South Africa, Uruguay, and the United Kingdom. It's also true that it only covers a limited subset of rights, in this case, children's rights. There is undoubtedly, therefore, an important opportunity for other UN agencies, civil society actors, and academics to expand this research to other countries and rights. So a call to arms to everybody out there. However, the findings for each of those case studies, as the previous speakers have said, is unquestionably positive. Positive for the credibility and standing of the Council and its mechanisms, for UN agencies and programs, for the states concerned, and most importantly, for rights holders. The case studies prove, in short, that the UN human rights system works. And that needs to be repeated, it works. That it can, given the right conditions, deliver results, and that it can succeed in realizing rights and changing lives. In addition to these broad conclusions, the research also reveals a number of more specific conclusions and good practices. I'll say 10 of them briefly. First, one of the main reasons human rights change is so difficult to track and measure is that it's quiet change. An information campaign that begins to change public perceptions, a small amendment to national legislation, or a training program for police officials. Notwithstanding, over time, cycle by cycle, all of these small incremental steps combine to create a powerful forward momentum. Second, a central reason why the system works is that it is premised on the full and voluntary involvement and engagement of states, the primary human rights duty bearers. This is important because it means that states feel ownership of the process. They have a stake in its success and are more likely to implement the mechanism's recommendations than would otherwise be the case. Third, linked with the above point, or the point I just made, this report also demonstrates the importance of engaging with all the UN human rights mechanisms, not just one. as well as the importance of engaging with each stage of the reporting implementation reporting cycle on an ongoing basis. 4, all 6 case studies show the value of detailed, fact-based and insightful reporting back to the United Nations mechanisms, both by states and by the UN entities on the ground and civil society. This allows the mechanisms to fully understand the situation in the country concerned and eventually provide useful recommendations. 5, national civil society should be widely consulted in the preparation of both state national reports and United Nations system reports in order to develop an accurate and nuanced position of the situation on the ground, and eventually to allow the mechanism to provide useful recommendations. 6, each of the case studies demonstrates the importance of clear, precise and practicable recommendations to states. 7, each of the case studies highlights the importance and value of close cooperation between states and UN mechanisms, entities and UN country teams. Nearly all of the instances of human rights progress identified and celebrated, as the President of the Council said in this report, we found, built on close cooperation and a close level of trust between states, the UN mechanisms and UN country teams on the ground. 8, implementation must be understood and taken forward as a democratic rather than a bureaucratic process. That means it should not just be about a limited number of line ministries working bureaucratically to implement, but implementation to work must involve the full range of national stakeholders. Government, yes, but also parliamentarians, judges and lawyers, national human rights institutions. In some cases, civil society actors themselves can help with implementation. And the report shows that when that happens, when all national stakeholders together with the UN are pulling in the same direction, that's when we tend to have human rights progress and impact. 9, insufficient human rights and technical capacity to engage effectively with the human rights mechanisms, especially, of course, amongst developing countries, and especially least developed countries and small island states, is a huge barrier to progress amongst developing countries. Of course, as the chair of this meeting said, and as others have said, you also need political will. But where there is political will, it's imperative that the international community provides technical assistance and capacity building support to help states, developing countries, implement the recommendations they're getting. And last but not least, tracking and measurement. These are areas of huge importance when it comes to implementation. There's no good just states implementing things and then we don't know about it and the international community doesn't know about it, national stakeholders don't know about it. Unfortunately, the UN human rights system has been behind the curve when it comes to using empirical evidence, impact indicators to actually measure and show progress and to measure and show success. And so all of us need to do far better with that. And so all of those things together, Ambassador, and I'll finish here, I think really show that the UN human rights system, and that's why I'm personally excited and was very happy to see the results, given the right conditions, given political will, given commitment to cooperate between states and the mechanisms, the international human rights system really can deliver results, can improve lives, can strengthen the enjoyment of human rights on the ground, can promote human dignity, and all of us need to, I hope, celebrate that fact and tell the world that that's happening, because that is incredibly important for the credibility of the international human rights system. But most of all, it's important for people on the ground that they know the system is there, they know their human rights are being promoted and protected, and they know that the international human rights system and all of us are there for them. Thank you, Ambassador.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you the Universal Rights Group and UNICEF for producing this report, because as you said, we have to continually say that human rights mechanisms can successfully contribute to changing children's lives, and also the importance of continue this work. So I think it's a very, as you said, a very relevant report that we all need to read, particularly during this Christmas time. But now let's move to the case studies. And I would like to hear now, I'm going to invite speakers to talk about the case studies covered in the report, namely Kyrgyzstan, Mongolia, Montenegro, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. I will give 4 minutes to each speaker to highlight what they consider was a key success factor in their case study, and also possibly a lesson learned that could benefit others. Then I invite participants to prepare their questions for the panelists, and I really encourage all to respect the time limits so we can be in a position to engage in a dialogue with the participants. And first, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Natalia Nikitenko, Member of Parliament in Kyrgyzstan, Head of the Parliament's Committee on Rule of Law, Combating Crime and Anti-Corruption. Ms. Nikitenko has been playing a key and instrumental role in introducing child rights legislation in the country, including to increase the legal age of marriage to 18 years. Ms. Nikitenko, you have the floor, please.
Hello, dear Excellencies. Please let me start by thanking for the invitation to participate in such a high-level event to a topic to which my country, Kyrgyzstan, dedicates great attention, the defense of human rights for children. We all live in the pandemic era, and we do aware that the pandemic actually emphasized so many issues and problems in protecting human rights. We should openly ask ourselves as communities, as government officials and societies, how good we are in protecting the children's rights, the rights of women, vulnerable groups. Unfortunately, in many developing countries, we are facing the problem with the topic of protecting the children's rights. And really, indeed, we should shift from declarations to the demonstration of results, to the real actions. And it's time to unite the efforts of all stakeholders, parliaments, governments, international institutions, civil societies, and the groups themselves to actually be more efficient, be more responsive, be more open in protecting children's rights. Today, I would like to share with our global audience how Kyrgyzstan is taking steps to put an end to one of the practices affecting children, and more specifically girls in our country, and featured in the report presented today. This is child marriage problem and bride kidnapping. This issue has been repeatedly recognized as key by the United Nations human rights mechanisms, and for more than 10 years, Kyrgyzstan has received recommendations on how to put an end to it. Also internally in the country, the phenomenon has gradually gained traction in the public discourse. But till now, we have not been able to put an end to such horrific practice, primarily for 2 reasons. First, the rooted social norms that normalize this practice in certain contexts of the country, because many people think that this is ancient tradition that should be respected. And the second, the reluctance demonstrated by a good number of officials in different areas of the public administration. In our work to change this reality, the first success factor has been the ongoing work to change the social norms surrounding this practice, including the change of its perception by society. On this sense, the training of police officers and judges, the launch of public awareness raising campaigns and educational programs, using mass media, using social media, have contributed to the positive change. Such efforts were given greater urgency by the shocking murder in 2018 of the girl Burulay. She was a medical student from Bishkek who was murdered by a jealous admirer who had kidnapped her to force her into marriage. That was shocking for the whole society and actually influenced a lot for the informational mass media campaigns to the opinions of people and change the situation. The second success factor has been the legislative reform introduced in 2018, initiated by the Forum of Women member of the Kyrgyz Parliament, from which I had the honor of being part of, and supported by UNICEF and the UN Gender Thematic Group. Thanks to this reform, the legislative amendments to the Criminal Code raised the level of criminal conviction for bride kidnapping to 10 years imprisonment. Further legislation was also passed criminalizing parents who allow bride kidnapping or child marriages, as well as religious leaders who still oversee wedding ceremonies involving a minor. As a result of this legislative reform, 2018 saw a considerable increase, around 100% compared to the previous year, in the number of prosecutions for these crimes. Specifically, the number of such prosecutions jumped from 33 in 2014 to 52 in 2017. And during the first 6 months of 2019, 118 criminal cases of bride kidnapping were being pursued across the country. The third success factor has been the engagement of religious leaders to prevent the spreading of child marriage and bride kidnapping. For example, in 2016, the engagement with the Muslim community led to the head of the Muftiyat, the highest Islamic institution in Kyrgyzstan, to issue a public notice to all imams, calling all imams not to officiate at marriages in which any of the members of the couple is under 18. We look at these factors with contained optimism. At least available numbers included in multiple indicator cluster survey of 2018 suggest that important progress has been made over recent years between 2014 and 2018. For example, the proportion of girls under the age of 19 who were married fell from 13.8% to 9.1%. However, this still means that 1 out of 11 of our girls is still suffering from this despicable practice. We will relentlessly continue working to end it, and we will continue to rely on the UN human rights system and all of you to support us in this endeavor. Our girls count on us, and we will not fail them. Thank you very much for this support, and we're open for the further continuation on working on this very important topic for our country.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nikitenko, for your statement, for your commitment, and for the important work you are doing. We wish you all success. I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Veljko Milonjic, Head of the General Directorate for Multilateral Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Montenegro. And he will share how he thinks that the UN human rights system has contributed to the important results achieved in the country, including, as we have heard, a 50% decrease of the number of children in residential care over the last decade. Ambassador, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. President of the HRC, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank previous speakers for sharing their experiences and good practices in field of promotion and protection of rights of the child. I wish to commend UNICEF, Office for Europe and Central Asia, and the Universal Human Rights Group for developing this report, which describes how our engagement with human rights mechanisms may bring real change to lives of children and their families. I'm particularly pleased to present my country, Montenegro, which has been recognized as one of the 6 most successful in terms of dynamics in improving mechanisms for implementation and exercising the rights of the child. The success is a result of a dedication and synergy of both our national institutions and our partners who have been our strong support in developing and strengthening national capacities and legal framework in this field. Integrated cross-sectoral approach as a horizontal mechanism has been crucial for achieved results. This is a long-term process which requires willingness and dedication as well as expertise in implementation, and it is not only about advancement of standards, but about the advancement of a mindset of people and the community which implements them. That is why a comprehensive and multi-year targeted campaigns are very much needed. The ones which require all of society approach with many stakeholders from the state administration to international partners, from media to the NGOs. Montenegro's foreign policy goals are clear, EU integration being the most visible one, and generally it requires achievement of new, better standards in all spheres of society, childcare system being one of the most important social policies. We need powerful partnerships which aim for the same goal, and that is why we permanently enhance cooperation between the government of Montenegro, delegation of the European Union, and the UNICEF office in our country. Montenegro is strongly committed to its international obligations with clear determination and political will for translation of recommendations of the UN treaty bodies and other human rights mechanisms into the concrete reforms and reality for our citizens. Not going into details, I wish to point out several major successes. For us, the concluding observation of the UN committees were the roadmap for defining priorities and action plans for promotion and safeguarding of the right of the child. Therefore, based on the recommendation of the Committee of the Rights of the Child, we adopted the comprehensive national strategic document for exercising rights of the child 2019-2023. We are proud of tangible results achieved in the prevention of family separation, removal of children from large-scale residential institutions into safe and caring family environments, and the inclusion of children with disabilities in our society. We have developed special services for families, support parenting, program for parents of children with disabilities, psychological support, home visits, small group community programs in cooperation with the UNICEF and the NGOs. In the period of 2010-19, the number of children in institutional care declined about 50%. We have almost completely eradicated the practice of placement of children under 3 years of age into large residential institutions and help ensuring equal chances and enrollment in mainstream education for children with disabilities. Today, we can proudly say that we have implemented strategic and systematic reform from harmonizing legislative framework with international standards, capacity building of professionals from all domains, health, education, social, child protection, and justice, to the implementation of awareness of raising campaigns. The joint campaign, It's All About Ability and Every Child Needs a Family, significantly contributed to the change of social norms and rising of public awareness of the importance of the right of the child to live in a caring family environment. This is all our joint success, and we highly appreciate the work of UNICEF, which inspired us, supported our national strategic capacity building and implementation of all projects related to child protection and broader child rights agenda for almost 2 decades. UNICEF has been our traditional, reliable, and a long-standing partner, and this is recognized as the main knowledge driver in this field. However, as mentioned before, this is a long-term but also never-ending work. We are aware of the remained issues regarding the deinstitutionalization of children with disabilities and promotion of alternative care services. Standards and successes once achieved need to be kept strong. New challenges, as the actual and unexpected health crisis hits the most those who are the most vulnerable ones, and we cannot even yet perceive what the consequences will be. Our partnership and dedication are best guaranteed that we will keep the good work, and I assure you that the government of Montenegro stands ready to continue working hard towards improvement and protection of child rights, while UN recommendation is our guidance. I thank you.
I thank you very much, Ambassador Milonjic, for sharing your experiences with us and for highlighting the importance of joint work, cross-cutting and working with all partners. It is time for us to hear about the South African study. It is therefore my pleasure to present Mr. Seliso Tipanyane, CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission, an important player in combating violence against children in the country. Mr. Tifanyane, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And in the South African culture, all protocol observed. I want to start by thanking UNICEF and the Universal Rights Group for this important report, which actually comes at the right time in the South African context, where we are highly challenged, by violence and how it affects everything in our country, including child rights. We also want to acknowledge the role played by colleagues in UNICEF who prepared the country case study for us. The report, highlights the current challenges which we are facing in this country as far as violence and how it impacts children. And therefore, as I was saying earlier on, it really comes at the right time and helps us as South Africans to continuously address this issue and find better ways of dealing with it. We inherited a legacy of violence under colonialization and apartheid, and unfortunately, that legacy is still with us and continue to haunt us. And of course, also in the past 25 years, we've not done so well as a country in addressing these issues, despite the fact that we've ratified all the key international human rights treaties, and we have bodies like the Human Rights Commission, but it still continues to be a challenge. And so the report in that sense, it's a very useful reminder. Secondly, the report highlights, the role of UNICEF in helping us in our country, to continue the struggle around child rights. And we really do appreciate that role of UNICEF, which we hope will continue. And in this regard, we as the South African Human Rights Commission entered into an MOU with UNICEF this year to actually help the Human Rights Commission to contribute a lot more in how we can advance the struggle for child rights. And some of the things which actually came out as a result of this engagement with UNICEF was the establishment this year in the Human Rights Commission of a think tank committee on child rights issues, which include all stakeholders in the country, UNICEF, government departments and NGOs, academic institutions, to actually get together all human rights champions in figuring out how best we can, advance the struggle for child rights. And then secondly, we as a Human Rights Commission, together with the support of UNICEF, have taken a resolution that will set up a dedicated child rights unit in the Commission, which will basically focus on all the work of the Commission at international, regional, and national level in advancing child rights. So we really do appreciate that. And of course, last year, our country ratified the optional protocol against torture, and the Human Rights Commission has been designated as an NPM, which will basically monitor all detention centers in our country to ensure that there's no torture, there's no cruel and inhuman degrading treatment. But also, in view of the COVID-19, we've basically seen the impacts of COVID-19 on child rights issues. So the number of issues which we're looking at as well as to how, for example, the economic impacts of COVID-19 have affected children in a very violent manner, amongst many other things. So basically, this some of the things we'll be doing. And in this regard, then the report is really, really important for us. In closing, I want to paraphrase what Nelson Mandela said many years ago, that a nation should be judged by how it treats its children. And I think the same thing happens to all of us at a global level, that we should all be judged by how we treat our most vulnerable people, especially children, who are the future of the country and the whole world. And therefore, violence continues to undermine, in all its form, undermine how we create a conducive environment for the protection of child rights. And therefore, we commit ourselves as a commission to continue the national, regional, and global struggle to advance child rights. And therefore, the report is highly, highly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tifanyane, for sharing with us your work and your experiences, and also for inspiring us to continue working in this agenda. Now we will hear Professor John Knox, Professor of International Law at Wake Forest University in the United States, and former UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Environment. As a Special Rapporteur, Professor Knox visited Mongolia and was one of the mechanisms to draw the attention and issue recommendations on air pollution in the country, which UNICEF and others then supported in implementation. Professor Knox, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you to UNICEF and to the Universal Rights Group. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this important discussion about this path-breaking report. Mongolia, of course, is famous for its herder culture, and in the minds of people around the world, it's associated with open space and distant horizons. But half of the people in the country live in just one city, Ulaanbaatar, which in the winter becomes one of the most polluted cities in the world. There are many reasons for this, including pressure from overgrazing and climate change. But the point is that Ulaanbaatar, especially in the winter, when people are burning coal to stay warm, is a source of a huge amount of air pollution. Mongolia is well aware of this threat, but UNICEF's major contribution was to focus attention on the effect of air pollution on children, who are much more vulnerable to the effects of all types of environmental harm. In 2015, UNICEF proposed a series of concrete steps for the government and others to address air pollution and increase the protection of children. Those efforts were then picked up by UN human rights bodies. In 2017, the Committee on the Rights of the Child issued concluding observations on Mongolia that included mirroring of the UNICEF recommendations, including by calling on the state to protect children with high efficiency particulate air filters and monitoring and regulating air pollutant levels. As the first Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, I visited Mongolia in September 2017, and I echoed the UNICEF and committee's recommendations in my visit and in my report in 2018. UNICEF has continued to follow up on these issues since my visit, including through a joint report with Mongolia's National Center for Public Health, and by providing a range of materials and videos to increase awareness of the problem. The government has taken concrete steps in response, including providing air purifiers to kindergartens and healthcare centers and distributing high-efficiency particulate air filters for free as part of prenatal packs given to expectant mothers. So, what are some lessons we can draw from this experience? Let me identify first two particular factors in the success. One is that the government recognized the importance of the issue and worked closely with UNICEF to address the issue from a rights-based perspective. Second, the UN human rights mechanisms worked together with UNICEF to reinforce and amplify UNICEF's message, and then UNICEF incorporated their recommendations into its own follow-up work. As Mark Lyman stated earlier today, one real weakness of treaty body and special rapporteur recommendations is a lack of follow-up. In this case, UNICEF helped ensure that there would be effective follow-up. Finally, what lesson can we draw for other contexts? The highlights of UNICEF here, the success of UNICEF here, actually highlight a weakness in the system. In this case, UNICEF provided the necessary connections between the different United Nations human rights mechanisms. But without UNICEF, it's doubtful that the issue would have received so much attention. The Committee on the Rights of the Child, for example, only considers Mongolia every few years. Special rapporteurs don't have a systematic way of following up their recommendations. I fear that many of the other recommendations in my report on Mongolia have not received the same amount of attention. So on issue other than children's rights, how can these necessary connections and coordinations and follow-up be made? Civil society organizations, of course, in the country play a key role in defining the issues and pushing for implementation, and they can help to provide connections, pathways of information between different parts of the UN system and the government and other civil society organizations. But what other organizations within the United Nations could play this role? Ideally, perhaps OHCHR would have offices in every country, but realistically, OHCHR does not have those resources, and many other countries would not accept it. So that means other organs and entities within the United Nations need to strengthen their ties with the UN human rights mechanisms. For environmental issues, that could mean and it has meant the UN Environment Program, for health issues, the World Health Organization, and so forth. In my view, the most important potential actor here within the UN system is probably the UN Development Program. UNDP has a presence in most developing countries. It has more staff on the ground already. And I welcome the statement of the President of the Human Rights Council earlier today that the URG process is increasingly focusing on development issues. I think this is an opportunity for UNDP and the UN human rights mechanisms to strengthen their ties with one another. Reports like this one can serve as a useful guide to all institutions within the UN system, showing what can be done when UN agencies work closely with the UN human rights mechanisms to assist governments to implement their human rights commitments. Thank you again to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Knox, for your comments and certainly for reminding us the importance of joint work. As you said, it's very important that the whole system delivers as one, and precisely that is the purpose of the UN reform. But thank you for highlighting that. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, Mr. Dragan Nastic, I just would like to mention the list of speakers. So I will give them the floor immediately after for their comments, questions. Is Ms. Carla Giovannoni, followed by Ms. Ilaria Paolasi, followed by Mr. Gianni Magazzeni, followed by Ms. Christine Lowe, and then Mr. Milon Kotari, and finally, Mr. Suna Jung Farenborg. There is also one question that has been included in the chat that is presented by Mr. Alfonso Barragues from UNFPA Geneva, and says, could Mark or any country panelist indicate how the project assess the degree to which a policy or institutional change could be effectively attributed to the implementation of human rights recommendations? Could that change be attributed to other factors, particularly national forces at work? So I will go back to all these lists and questions afterwards, but now let me give the floor to Mr. Dragan Nastic, CRC Strategic Lead at UNICEF UK. UNICEF UK and its civil society partners has taken a lead role in systematically and consistently leveraging human rights mechanisms to secure the abolition of corporal punishment across the UK. That has resulted in such abolition in Jersey, Wales, and Scotland, and that is the topic of the case study. Mr. Nastic, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be with you on behalf of UNICEF UK, and thank you for this opportunity. I believe that the UK case study demonstrates the importance of engaging with the United Nations human rights systems and proves that it is capable of and is succeeding in securing progress in the enjoyment of child rights. Our case study, as mentioned, is focused on the issue of corporal punishment, and our advocacy work on our own and together with partners in coalitions. A major breakthrough was achieved in 2019 when, as mentioned, the corporal punishment was prohibited in Scotland, Wales, and Jersey. The explanatory memorandum attached to the draft parliamentary acts directly cited the obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and relevant recommendations by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child as the central motivation behind this legislative initiative. But this is just the beginning of a long journey before corporal punishment is banned all across the UK. My key point is that the value and importance of engaging with and using the complementary power of all the United Nations human rights mechanisms. Although the reporting process under the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the main one for UNICEF UK, we also engage with a number of different UN treaty bodies and, significantly, with the Universal Periodic Review mechanism. This, what I call holistic approach, helps bring pressure on the governments from multiple different angles. and also help ensure there is no gap in alternative reporting. In other words, there's no opportunity is missed to raise the issue with the United Nations mechanisms and thereby with the UK. Furthermore, raising the issue of corporal punishment with different treaty bodies allowed UNICEF UK and our partners to engage with different government ministries. All this cumulative effort is vital, as corporal punishment is a controversial and politically sensitive issue. UNICEF UK has also become increasingly engaged with the UK's reporting cycle under the Universal Periodic Review, ever since its establishment in 2006. Indeed, because of the high political importance the UK government attaches to the UPR as a state-to-state review mechanism, it has become an increasingly useful entry point for UNICEF UK's advocacy. This strategy has been successful. For instance, in the UK's first cycle of the UPR review, 1/3 of all recommendations it received addressed children's rights concerns. In the third reporting cycle, there were 7 recommendations from 7 different governments addressing just the issue of corporal punishment. My conclusion is that the different UN human rights mechanisms are complementary and mutually reinforcing. Where states and UNICEF engage with a number of different mechanisms on a given subject, those mechanisms tend to share information and provide stronger recommendations. So my message is, let's use them all. It is UNICEF's mandate. It is hugely rewarding, and importantly, these mechanisms will be as strong and as effective as we, their stakeholders, make most of them. Thank you very much.
Mr. Nastic, for your comments and also for referring to the importance of the complementarity nature of all human rights mechanisms. Now I will open the floor for comments and questions. I would like to invite everyone to join the discussion. Please bear in mind that we only have 15 minutes left. And try to be very, very specific and concrete on your comments and questions so we can give the floor to the panelists to respond to them. I start and I give the floor to Ms. Carla Giovannoni from the Permanent Mission of Uruguay, one of the sponsors of this event and of the annual Human Rights Council resolution on the right of the child.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thanks a lot for giving me the floor. And I would like to start by thanking Universal Rights Group and UNICEF for the important work you both have done on the report, and of course for organizing this event and inviting us to co-sponsor it. And we also want to start extending the sincere apologies of our Human Rights Director that really wanted to be present today in this event, but couldn't at the last minute for another internal commitment. Indeed, the report presented today makes an excellent attempt to measure the impact on the ground of the human rights recommendations received by states from the international human rights system. We want to commend that effort and to join our voice to some comments made before by Mark on how the reports contribute to close the circle and to really prove how the human rights system works and it's effective on the ground. We also want to highlight that for us it's fundamental to ensure an efficient follow-up of the recommendations and as well to guarantee that the system and especially the Office of the High Commissioner has enough resources to offer cooperation and technical advice to states so that the states are supported in their efforts to implement the human rights recommendations. And we welcome the report focus on the children right related recommendations, and we are pleased that Uruguay was included as a country case of the report. We welcome the specific focus that our national case had on the unequal access to the right to education, and we take the opportunity to reaffirm Uruguay commitment to continue advancing the rights of the child in general, but in particular the right to education. And to stress that all the recommendations that we received from the human rights system serve as a guide of all the efforts we do at the national level, including to address the challenges we still face on this education areas, for example, regarding secondary school dropout rates. As a part of all the main human rights treaties of the universal system, we received a significant number of recommendations. So it's of course a lot of work and it's a big responsibility to ensure the follow-up of all those recommendations. That's why we wanted to highlight that in our national experience, the national mechanism for the preparation of reports and follow-up of recommendations that actually was established in 2016, it has done a significant change in the way all the national institutions understand and are involved in this process. We also want to highlight that in the framework of our national mechanism, we always try to have extensive consultations with civil society organizations. We are really happy to have that really good working relation, including, of course, with UNICEF at our national level. And that would be all from our side. We want to thank again to the organizers and to congratulate them, especially for the report that we really hope encourage others to keep doing this type of studies that are so relevant, so that everyone understands what's the real impact of the human rights system on the ground. Thank you, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the technology here, but thank you so much, Carla, Giovannoni. And now I would like to turn to Mr. Ilaria Paolasi, Deputy Director, Child Rights Connect. 2 minutes, please, Ms. Paolasi. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. On behalf of Child Rights Connect, the largest network of civil society organizations that, together with UNICEF, is the strategic partner of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, I would like to welcome this report, especially at the time of a general pushback on child rights exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. In the current increasingly challenging context for civil society, it is very important that the report has acknowledged that implementation is a democratic process that needs the engagement of different actors, including civil society. Civil society, especially national child rights coalitions, play a key role in relation to the follow-up to the recommendations of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, as well as other UN mechanisms, as it has happened in many of the countries showcased in the report. And so they do child human rights defenders who engage with the CRC committee, but also with the other UN mechanisms. We really hope that the next report of this kind will focus on the impact achieved through the active contribution of children themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Mr. Gianni Magazzeni, Chief of the UPR branch of the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I also would like very much to welcome this report by UNICEF and URG and indicate that it is really a good model of showing how the human rights mechanism can have an impact at country level. I think that we hope that this will be replicated by other UN entities, because
it will show how much can be done in individual countries by making full use of the information that results from the Human Rights Council, but also the treaty bodies. The second point I would like to briefly recall here is the Secretary General call to action for human rights earlier this year as part of the 75th anniversary, and the fact that he indicated very clearly that the UPR can be an important element to maximize engagement at country level. And as we are in the middle of the third cycle, we have done some 140 countries. Let me say here very clearly that it is something that has already proven to have a great impact in national context. That is why we have put out a practical guidance on the use of the UPR, which will be a point of reference for UN heads worldwide, not just RCs, but also the SRSG. We do hope that every single entity of the UN will use this mechanism and recommendation so as to advance in the promotion and protection of human rights fully in line with their mandate. And finally, I would like to say that the UPR is an entry point. This has been said many times, and it's complementary and it's work in synergy with treaty body and special procedures mandate holder recommendation. And it is an entry point because there is a sovereign decision by member states. Let's not forget that there is about 3 to 4 months between the review and when there is a decision on every single recommendation. And that sovereign decision on accepting certain recommendation is the beginning of a conversation also on very sensitive issues. So well done to UNICEF and URG. We hope that other UN entities within the context of their mandate will also follow through and show what can be done at national context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Magazzini, for your comments. I will conclude the list of speakers, giving the floor to 3 more persons, and then immediately going to their responses. Now I give the floor to Ms. Christine Lowe, Director of UN Women Liaison Office.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. On behalf of UN Women, I would like to congratulate UNICEF and the URG for this groundbreaking report, which is measuring the on-the-ground delivery and impact of the international human rights system. What a great result to see that international conventions generate measurable improvements in the enjoyment of human rights on the ground when implementation is supported by strategic engagement. UN Women also supports and closely collaborates with different human rights mechanisms and processes to ensure that international norms and standards are effectively implemented and truly benefit women and girls worldwide. For example, UN Women actively promotes the ratification of the CEDAW Convention and provides a range of technical assistance to countries in every region and to the implementation of the convention. We further support also the Universal Periodic Review of the Human Rights Council and work with OHCHR to support the country visits of special procedures, in particular those working on women's rights and gender equality. So it's encouraging that the report confirms that this approach works, that with strategic engagement, global norms do make a difference in everyday lives of people. So thank you again for sharing, all of you, what works best. UN Women looks forward to learning from these best practices and to continue leveraging its normative, coordination and operational mandate while working closely with member states and other partners, including the whole UN system, to make gender equality a reality everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christine, for your comments. Now I give the floor to Mr. Milun Kotari, President of UPR Info and former Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing. You have the floor.
Thanks very much, Ambassador, and congratulations to UNICEF and URG for the excellent report. It's without doubt that the UN human rights system has an impact at the national level. The point I wanted to make was that, how do we move beyond, in a way, what Mark Limon was referring to as quiet change? Very often when we say impacts are good or there are good practices, we stop at there being a new national law, a new policy, more budgets, more committees. But does this really, all these changes that we consider to be an impact, do they really make a difference on the ground? Is there a change? Is there a reduction in poverty? Are less people being tortured? And so I think the point is that when we do the impact studies, perhaps as we go forward, there are several studies underway. There's one by OHCHR on 7 countries, good practices of the UPR. There's a 20-country study going on the impact of UN treaty bodies led by the University of Pretoria. I think, but all of these need to go beyond just recognition in law and policy to actually seeing what has changed on the ground. And that's a lot of work. But the point I want to make is we need to move in that direction to really demonstrate that it makes a difference in people's lives beyond just laws and policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kotari, for your comments. And now I give the floor to the last person that was asking for the floor, Suna Jun Frambrook. You have the floor, please. Are you there, Miss Suna Jun Frambrook? No? Okay. If that is not the case, then I will start giving the floor to our panelists for responding to or making comments on the questions that we heard, and let me give them the floor in the same order that they intervene. But before doing that, and because of the tyranny of the Zoom meetings, I have to run to another meeting, but I don't want to close the discussion because I think there are many things that have to be said. And my colleague, Alondra Mendoza, that is in charge of child issues at the mission, will continue moderating the event. I really want to thank UNICEF and Universal Rights Group for inviting me to moderate, and I really have to apologize because I have to run to another meeting that I tried to accommodate, but it was very, very difficult. So I thank you so much again. I wish you all the best, and my colleague Alondra Mendoza will continue the moderation of this meeting. And then I give the floor, before saying disconnecting myself, I give the floor to Natalie for her comments. Please. Natalia Nikitenko, I changed even the name. Natalia Nikitenko, you have the floor, please.
Okay. Thank you all for your questions and for your comments. Just the final maybe note that I would like to add. Definitely, it's very important not just to acknowledge the problem with protecting the children's rights, but to be honest with ourselves how efficient we are in that aspect. And as continuation of the Kyrgyzstan case, I would like just to offer pay attention on monitoring and evaluation tools, because we're declaring the SDG, no one should be left behind, but is children group is not left behind? Definitely, especially in the pandemic era, we do realize and understand that there are so many challenges. That is why, for example, on the level of our parliament and the government, we adopted the tool of monitoring and evaluation for legislation, for governmental programs, to be more clear about the current situation and have the evidence-based information about the state programs and legislation protecting the children's rights. So we adopted these amendments to the legislation and the rules inside our parliament. And we have the Women Parliamentarian Forum that is very active in promoting the human rights protection agenda. So uniting our activities together with government, parliament, civil society, etc., we think that our experience and case will help us to be more open to the different social groups and to be more open and, let's say, really practical oriented and equipped with the evidence-based instruments of evaluation to answer this agenda, how efficient we are as the parliament, as the government, as government officials, living on the taxes and payments from our people, how efficient we are protecting their rights. So this instrument of monitoring and evaluation, I'll be more than happy to share how we did it as the MPs, how we're offering other countries to use these monitoring tools and instruments for the decision making to be maybe more efficient in this topic. So thank you. If someone is interested, I will be more than happy to share this information by my email and information in the social media.
Thank you, Mrs. Nikitenko, for your remarks and the answers to these final questions. I would now like to give the floor to Ambassador Milonjic for the responding the questions that were asked before. Please, the floor is yours, Ambassador.
Hello? Yes. So basically, some concluding remarks, as I said in speech before. The point here is, first of all, I'm answering from the perspective of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is like an umbrella institution that covers the topic together with other appropriate ministries, and is mainly cooperates with the office of the UNICEF in Montenegro. And from speaking from our personal experience, it's the precondition, of course, is the willingness on one side of the state, and this enthusiasm and kind of extra energy that the cooperation with the international organizations, mainly the UNICEF, is something that brings the added value and actually keeps the momentum, because the core thing here is to have this momentum always present, since, as I mentioned in the speech, it's not something that has a deadline. We can improve, and it's not about the change in the in some, of course, it's always good to have a concrete change and improvement in certain areas, but this is the change in the standards and in a way that you implement those standards, and the change in the mindset as a part of the process of becoming society that will address these issues as they come, because we don't know what might trigger some of these issues, as we didn't know that the pandemic is going to hit us all, and what are going to be the consequences of the pandemic. The important thing is to be ready, to have the system which is in place that can quickly address, and the standards that of course, with international knowledge, with exchange of practices, can be always, you know, in a way, developed, so it can really solve the problems that we are all facing. I like to look at this as the part of the process, to where we were before to where we are now, and you know, keeping the pace in order to go forward and to find the best way how to synchronize actions between all of these broad group of you know, state administration, the NGOs, the international community, and how to make a mechanism and the system that can at the same time improve itself, work on itself, exchange experiences, and of course, so that the child actually can feel the benefit in the development of the system. Basically, that is the greatest challenge, and that is something that we'd like to share as our own. It doesn't matter if you say the absolute, if you see the absolute number. Montenegro is a very small case study because we are a small country, but this is not about the numbers. It's about the practices that we are implementing and that can work in all societies.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your very good insights on this matter. We also share the view that it should be a continuous work to make it really effective. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Giovannoni so he can respond to the questions made by the participants. The floor is yours.
Thank you, ma'am. The South African Human Rights Commission is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And therefore, I can vouch that the system can work, but it depends really on the leadership in these institutions at both international as well as at domestic levels. And it can really work in advancing child rights issues. And I also, twisting a little bit what Milon said, yes, there has been a lot of quiet change, but there's also a need for a more loud change, especially as far as child rights are concerned. I was looking, for example, at the economic impacts of the violation of child rights in our country, and especially violence, as well as GBV. It costs a great percentage of our GDP, and I'm sure this applies to many countries in the world. And one of the problems we see that our leaders, especially government, don't fully appreciate the negative impacts of violating child rights and the positive impacts of advancing child rights. So I think we do need to send this message loud and clear to those who make decisions. And as a result of this, we in March next year, as a Human Rights Commission, will be organizing our first conference in this country on the impacts of corruption and human rights, including child rights. And I think we need to send a very clear message that these issues do affect children. So, this is what I want to say, that, yes, a lot could be done, all of us as a collective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giovannoni. It is true that we have to join our efforts to really make a change on this matter. Now, I would like to give the floor to Professor Knox so he can give his responses to the questions that were made by participants. Professor Knox, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Again, I just want to echo what others have said, including Gianni Magazzini. It's really critical, I think, for UN bodies to speak with one voice and to integrate a human rights approach throughout the United Nations system. This can also help to address Mulun Kathari's critical question, which is how to move beyond just quiet change, especially change that is only felt at the level of laws, but not in practice. In many areas, I think, such as my own particular area, that of the environment, I think there are indicators that can and have been used to measure progress or the lack of progress. For example, are levels of air pollution increasing or decreasing? Those are concrete questions that have concrete answers. In my experience, one United Nations body that I think is moving in the right direction on these issues is the UN Environment Program, which is increasingly trying to incorporate a human rights-based approach. But progress towards mainstreaming human rights throughout the United Nations has been slow, and it needs to be accelerated. This report, I think, shows what can be done when one UN body such as UNICEF does work closely together with UN human rights mechanisms, and I hope that this experience is replicated and repeated in other places. Thanks again very much.
Thank you, Professor Knox. Now, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Dragan Nastic, so he can give us also his views on the questions that were made by the participants. Mr. Nastic, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to reply to the question from Mr. Kotari and also a number of other participants with regards to measuring progress. I would argue, number one, that new legislation, although not an end in itself, is hugely important because that is a stepping stone to cultural change and new behavior. The full title of the legislation in Scotland, Wales, and Jersey is Equal Protection Against Assault. So for the first time, children have been recognized the same level of protection as other of us have had for always. The acts which were criminalized committing against us were allowed to be done against children. So the new legislation is politically and symbolically hugely important. Number two, I did mention that issue of corporal punishment is very sensitive and controversial. Governments don't rush into that so easily. For instance, in Wales, although the law was passed in March this year, it will actually enter into force in 2022. Until then, there's a lot being already done now to prepare all the layers of the society, police, parents, caregivers, education authorities for implementation of the new legislation to ensure maximum respect of the new legislation, because neither the Welsh government and none of us, including UNICEF, would like to see parents or caregivers being criminally prosecuted, being fined or going to jail for corporal punishment. And so there's a lot of preparation now being done to promote good parenting and to ensure compliance with the new legislation. And number three, also mechanisms are being put in place now, the database indicators and other measures to actually be able to monitor implementation and compliance with the new legislation. So very soon in the future, we will actually have a concrete data showing whether the cultural change and the change of behavior has been achieved and to what extent. But I have no doubt that the new legislation on its own is hugely important and the first step towards this cultural change that we would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nastic, for those valuable responses that we really appreciate. Thank you, everyone, for actively engaging in the discussion today. During this past hour and a half, we have heard how, when used in a consistent, systematic, and substantial manner, the UN human rights system does deliver results for people, in this case, children. We have also had a taste of the great variety of stakeholders who engage with the mechanism, governments, of course, but also parliaments, national human rights institutions, UN entities, and civil society, and how inclusive participatory approaches make for better results. Such a study is potentially a model that could be followed by others as well. All of us need to be more systematic in demonstrating the impact that our work, engagement, and investments have on people, especially the most vulnerable. It was very useful to hear the success stories that inspire us to keep on working on making human rights a reality for all and leave no one behind. These are important messages as we end a particular year, when human rights have been and are being threatened, when inequities have been exposed and deepened, when the human rights mechanism have been challenged. In these uncertain times, the UN human rights system is needed more than ever, and we hope that this event was received as an encouragement to value it and continue to invest in it. Thank you all for being today with us.